Hello, everyone. Welcome. Just going to let everyone get into the Zoom room and we will begin in just a moment. All right. Looks like we're ready to get going. Awesome. Well, I will go ahead and give a little intro and we will not delay any further. So, hi everyone. Welcome to our third session in the second year of our Disability and Arts webinar series. We are thrilled that you've chosen to spend the afternoon with us. My name is Amanda Noyes, and I am the Arts and Education Accessibility Director for the South Carolina Arts Commission. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm a white female in my mid-30s with brown hair and wearing a pink shirt with a gray sweater today. The mission of the South Carolina Arts Commission is to promote equitable access to the arts and support the cultivation of creativity in South Carolina. We are seeking to meet that mission in part through our partnership with Able South Carolina. We know that we can't have equitable access to the arts if arts programs and facilities are not accessible. About 2 years ago, SCAC launched our Arts for All SC grant, which was our first large-scale effort to support arts organizations who desire to work towards being more accessible. Since that launch, our partnership with Able SC has grown, and we are now working collaboratively to support arts organizations across the state in their accessibility journeys. If you are an arts organization in South Carolina and are not sure where to begin or feel like you need additional support or assistance in your accessibility work, please feel free to contact me and our friends over at Able, and we would really love to speak with you. Able is here with us today to help us better understand the new digital accessibility regulations that have been put in place by the Department of Justice and how they will impact your organization. I'm so excited for today's webinar, and I hope you find the information helpful. After this session, we will be taking a short break from the series and we'll begin again in February. So I'd please just encourage you to consider registering for the remaining sessions. I also invite you to attend our accessibility office hour, which is scheduled for Thursday, November 21st from 3 to 4 o'clock, which is an open time to come and continue the conversation. So feel free to bring questions that may arise from today's discussion into that space. Now I'll hand it over to Sarah and Corinne to get us started.
Thank you, Amanda. Hi, my name is Sarah Massengale. I use she and her pronouns, and I am an accessibility consultant working with my own consulting company, S&M Accessibility Consulting. I am here to help Able today work through the accessibility concerns and issues surrounding the final rule. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that today is a bit of a complicated day for many folks, that there are a lot of big thoughts and big feelings today, and that we are potentially about to give you content that is filled with more big thoughts and big feelings. So I want to give us about 30 seconds to just sit and kind of refocus so that we can go into this not thinking the big thoughts that are kind of going through all of our minds today. And Corinne, I'm going to ask you to keep time for me, and let's stop when that 30 seconds is up.
I think it's been about 30 seconds now. Um,
All right.
so I want to thank y'all again for joining us today. My name is Corinne Myers. I'm a community access specialist with Able, and I'm here with Sarah to really again explain what this final rule with from the DOJ is, and what you as organizations can do to prepare for this final rule.
And so to just kind of set some expectations, this is not going to be a step-by-step formula for not getting a complaint. What this is going to be is a time to kind of familiarize yourself with the final rule, to familiarize yourself with the guidelines that the final rule is based on, and to just get a better feel for your responsibility as organizations who are just getting started with accessibility. And for those of you who saw the first Introduction to Digital Accessibility webinar we did back in the second year of this, or first year of this, I suppose it would be. This is sort of the 102 level of that introduction webinar. And so for those of you who were not able to join us then, I would very much encourage you to go back and watch that recording. So with all of that out of the way, let's talk about what do we even mean when we say the final rule? What is it? So the final rule is something that was established by Attorney General Merrick B. Garland and the Department of Justice as sort of an extension of the Americans with Disabilities Act that says that all federal and state government web content and the web content of any entity receiving federal funding must be digitally accessible. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, what that means, but I'm going to pass it over to Corinne to tell us a little bit more about the history of this final rule.
Yeah, and again, going into like who has to comply with this final rule, it's anybody who receives government funding. So state and local government, cities, counties, towns, school districts, um, special districts, and nonprofit organizations.
Bear with me just a moment. My screen reader has done something ridiculous. Okay. All right. So bear with me just a second. I apologize. Corinne, would you take the next slide, please, while I figure out what's going on here?
Yes. Yeah, so we'll go into the brief history of the final rule. Um, the DOJ originally lacked clear rules for accessibility, and that led to a lot of inconsistent enforcement on accessibility in the digital space. There were always ways to determine physical accessibility since the 1999 or 1991 with the ADA accessibility guidelines, but there weren't appropriate measures for digital accessibility. And this was largely due to the internet still being new and developing. It didn't specifically address digital accessibility. Um, WCAG was seen as the main standard, but compliance wasn't federally mandated. There was significant pressure placed on the DOJ to issue definitive guidelines for digital accessibility, and this is where the final rule comes into play.
Yeah. This is real talk about why things should be accessible, folks. My screen reader just completely froze. Give me just a second. There we go. Okay.
Yeah, so for that question about individual artists, it really depends. So if you're receiving government funding, yeah, ideally your website should be accessible. Um, but it
Yes.
really applies to if you're receiving that federal government funding.
Yes. Okay. Now my screen reader has decided to behave. Okay. So apologies, folks. I am caught back up with us now. So with the foundations kind of laid for where the final rule is coming from, what do we mean when we say digital accessibility? And it basically refers to the any sort of content that is digitally based, web, digital documents, software platforms, ticketing platforms in the case of many arts organizations, etc. It must be fully accessible and available to people with disabilities. And so all of the considerations and standards that govern that, putting together with it, is what we mean when we say digital accessibility. And who is affected? More people really than you think. So people who are deaf, people who are blind, people who have motor disabilities, people with cognitive disabilities, people who are deaf, blind, but also non-disabled people. Because if a website is accessible, it's going to come up higher in the list of search results. The structure of an accessible web page, if it is designed correctly, will enable you to navigate the web page more easily, even if it hasn't fully loaded. So it's amazing the things that even non-disabled people benefit from when it comes to digital accessibility. And so we're going to slide over to measuring accessibility. So when we think about, particularly in the world of organizations, we know that making things measurable is really important. And so how do we measure something that sounds pretty subjective, right? Digital accessibility is very subjective. So how do we measure it? We measure it in a system of pass-fail compliance with WCAG, WCAG, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And so that's why standards like WCAG and the current European standards that are being legalized are really important. Because if we don't have something to measure, how do we, indicate to people that we are accessibly conformant? All right, Corinne, tell us more about Section 508 and what it means to be 508 compliant.
So when it comes to 508 compliance, it refers to the Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This was amended in a federal law that requires federal agencies to provide people with disabilities equal access to electronic information and data. And then the law applies to all federal agencies when they develop procedures, maintain, or use information and communication technology. So largely like websites, and other platforms that you think about accessing digitally every day.
Okay, next slide.
The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are a set of technical standards that help make websites more accessible for people with disabilities. It was developed by the World Wide Web Consortium. We call it usually the W3C, and is considered the global standard for digital accessibility. So when I go in or when Sarah goes in and to review websites, this is what we largely use to determine compliance and the standards that we assess websites with. WCAG within itself is not a law, but the basis of most of the digital accessibility regulations around the world, and organizations that strive to comply with the ADA should also follow WCAG standards.
And what we will note here is that WCAG is what the text of the final rule uses as the conformance standard for making digital content fully accessible. Okay, so in the text of the final rule, it specifically says that entities must comply with WCAG version 2.1. Now, this is interesting because we are actually at WCAG version 2.2. So why? Why are we not testing at 2.2? And the reason this matters is because 2.2 is not considered by many entities to be old enough to be in practice long enough, so to speak, to be the recognizable standard. And so folks are still at this point deferring to 2.1, even though many private entities are testing at 2.2. All right, so Corinne, do you want to tell us about POUR?
Yeah, so when we use WCAG and the levels, we go based off of these four POUR principles. And POUR essentially stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And we'll go more into how these are broken down and what rules apply to these. So for perceivable, it's really, can I make sense and interact with it? Perceivable means users should be able to understand the information on the website. If you look to the right, you'll see an example of text written in what we would call like a ransom note text of cut out pieces of magazines. And it really shows where our eyes will fall to. So you'll see like the image and then the normal text. And we would consider the text underneath that to be easier to read and understand. This includes providing text alternatives for images, so alt text, providing descriptions on the back end so that screen readers can catch it and describe the images that are on the websites and other digital platforms. And that the content works with assistive technology so everyone can access it, regardless of their visual, auditory, or other sensory disabilities. And then you can see at the bottom of an example of a quote that we've heard before is this a book or a ransom note? Text and image is a no-go for me.
So, and to kind of get into that, so that is a reference to a specific guideline. So one of the things that we look for when we audit is something called images of text. And so in other words, if you have important text to share with someone, why put in an image when you can write it out? Because for a couple of reasons, a screen reader is not going to detect the images, the text in the image. A person who is low vision or colorblind may not be able to read the text in the image. A person with a cognitive disability may not recognize that they need to look to the image for the information they want. There are a lot of problems with images of text. So, and it also kind of goes to the idea of sending like screenshots. We've seen this where someone will make a really cool flyer and they will send it to a screenshot. And when you send that to a screen reader user, basically, I have been known to send people emails back that just say question mark because I can't read it. And so just being really mindful that you don't need an image of text if you can write out that text. And so ergo our little funny ransom note example. So the next principle of POUR is operable. So essentially, can I use it? And the thing to know about this is that many folks with disabilities access the web in alternative ways. That might be only using a keyboard, that might be using alternative pointing devices like a mouth stick or eye gaze tracking technology. We all interact with the web differently. So if you're not meeting all of the guidelines in the operability principle, then you're not ensuring that anyone using an alternative method can access the web. And so if we look here, give me just a minute. Okay. And so, all right, Corinne, let's talk more about understandable. You want to give us that one?
Yeah, so understandable is what does it want me to do and how. Understandable means information and interfaces should be clear and easy to grasp. So, if you're going to a website, if they're looking to do a particular thing, they should be able to understand how to do that and it should be clear for them. Content should be used in plain language, so we often try to avoid big words or use words that you would consider easier to read and understand, and should be organized logically. Users should easily understand how to use websites, including instructions and error messages. So if you are filling out a form field, does it provide a clear error message and what needs to be corrected? Consistent navigation and clear headings can help users find what they need. Why error suggestions and form fields assist in fixing mistakes, like I said earlier. The main difference between perceivable and understandable is that perceivable relates to how we access something, while understandable refers to how clear the information is.
And we are particularly amused by the quote for this one because it's just funny. So what we have is an image of, if I am remembering the correct image, we have an image of people in raincoats and cats and dogs falling from the sky. And this is a reference to plain language. And it basically amounts to tell me that it's raining. Don't tell me about an animal parade. So a lot of times we hear the expression it's raining cats and dogs. For a person who needs plain language, that's very idiomatic. They're going to possibly think about that very literally. So imagine what someone might take away from that if they literally think cats and dogs are falling from the sky. Okay. Robust. So robust. So thinking about all of the different kinds of devices that we have. We have iPhones, maybe some of us have Androids, we have tablets, we have computers, we have all the things. Robust refers to making sure the website is designed and the code is such that it is used across all devices, and it can be used across all devices. And so just really being mindful that you're not, say, for instance, exclusively designing for mobile or asking your devs to exclusively design for mobile, because if someone then goes and pulls it up on a desktop computer using Access technology, they're not going to have the same experience. Okay. Understanding criteria levels. Corinne, I do not recall. Was this you or me? Apologies,
Yeah,
folks.
this one is you.
Okay, so understanding criteria levels. So when we look at WCAG, we break WCAG down into 3 sets of criteria levels: level A, level AA, and level AAA. So when you hear, oftentimes you will hear someone say, this has to be level AA compliant. What that means is it has to be compliant with both level A and level AA. Because in order to be level AA compliant, you also have to take the level A criteria into account. And we will talk about these. So level A, the bar is on the floor. And we have an image here of a limbo bar that is all the way on the floor. And there's a person looking at this limbo bar, and this person looks very, very bewildered. They are not quite sure how they are going to get on under this limbo bar. And that's level A, because we are at the floor level. We are doing the bare minimum to make sure that a person using access technology, that a person with a disability can hopefully, maybe, possibly move around and work with the website. All right, Corinne, tell us about level AA.
So level AA is when you've achieved compliance. This is what we kind of aim for when we're trying to adhere to these final rule requirements. It addresses the biggest and most common barriers for people with disabilities. The level builds on level A, but by adding more requirements that improve accessibility for broader range of users. Some examples include having a color contrast ratio of 4 or 5 to 1 for text, ensuring navigation is consistent across pages, making sure content is adaptable to different screen sizes or orientations, and providing captions for live audio content. If these requirements aren't met, most users with disabilities will have difficulty accessing the content, though the site may still be partially usable.
So level AAA, accessibility utopia. And this will show my geek humor, but the image for this is a picture of the Capitol from the Hunger Games. With the sun kind of shining down on it, and it just looks like utopia. So level AAA is, in practice, it is very difficult to achieve and sometimes not totally achievable, but it is the ideal form of accessibility for people with disabilities. It is theoretically gorgeous, and I have seen a couple of websites that have managed to achieve it very well. But sometimes in the attempt to achieve it, you can do sort of more harm than good. And so while AAA is awesome and we all wish we could do it, it is perfectly okay to understand that it's theoretical. It may not always be possible. So we have 3 examples of websites that represent the different criteria levels. I would like us to keep going for the moment, and if we have time to get to those, we will get to those, because we are also having a couple of screen reader technical difficulties at the moment. But let's talk about the difference between compliance and user-centered or inclusive design. So compliance, as you have heard, has the different criteria levels, is talking about WCAG. That is our guide for compliance. But you can have a fully compliant website that is not usable, right? It can be fully compliant, but buying tickets still requires 10 steps, which is not conducive to the fact that things often take longer with a screen reader, or for folks with distractibility concerns who might not be thrilled about it taking 10 steps to accomplish one task. So when we think about user-centered design or inclusive design, we think about things like this, theoretical 10-step ticket buying process. We do usability research with actual people with disabilities. We hear what they need. We let them test the prototypes. We get feedback. We design from a place of empathy and true inclusion and fully grasp the unique needs of as many disabilities as we can. And so at the end of the day, compliance is great, but if you have the ability and you're building new websites instead of remediating old ones, compliance is no substitute for inclusive design. And at the bottom of this link, or at the bottom of this slide, excuse me, there's a link to something developed by my mentor, Marcelo Paiva, who is a web developer and designer who has created something called the True Empathy Pledge. And this is for folks both in and out of the tech community who want to make a commitment to design inclusively and empathetically and with a disability and accessibility first mindset. So I encourage you, if that is something that interests you, absolutely feel free to sign this. There is no requirement, nothing like that. But if that is something that does interest you, absolutely take a look. All right, Corinne, tell us a bit more about the baseline of automated testing.
Yeah, so automated testing is used with tools that you can typically Google and find online. You'll see a few of them that Able uses, but there are many other tools out there. But the ones that Able is most familiar with are Adobe Color Contrast Checker, Axe DevTools, Andy, and Wave.
And these tools are really great to establish a baseline, to get reports that you can understand where you might need to modify or make your website more compliant. But what they are not is a substitute for manual testing. So manual testing is different because it means that you are going in with the assistive technologies that individuals with disabilities most commonly use, and you are approaching your website as they would approach it. And you are testing it as they would use it. Now, some people can simply manual test by looking at the code. And if you are a dev or a designer and you are familiar enough with accessibility to manual test with code alone, that is a great way to do it. But it is not necessarily going to tell you anything about the actual usability. It is going to be straight compliance focused. So just kind of keeping that in mind. And this is one of my favorite slides of the entire presentation. And it's really important that we talk about this because why do disabled people make the best testers? And I'm going to amend that slightly and say, why do qualified disabled people make the best testers? Because you can go find the one person in your organization who uses a screen reader, for instance, and they can tell you things about their personal experience with your website or app or whatever they're testing. And they can give you some excellent feedback, but they may not be a trained tester. But they will have the creative problem solving abilities, the ability to sort of work around things, the unique ways of thinking about things that many people with disabilities have. So they will probably be able to give you some very good usability feedback. Those of us with disabilities who are qualified testers have the added advantage of being able to give you both the usability feedback and a technical compliance audit, because this is the stuff that we deal with every day. Like, inaccessibility is very real, it is very prevalent. And so when you add the technical knowledge to the usability knowledge, it's a very, very powerful audit that you're going to get. All right, Corinne, tell us a little more about what next steps that we can take.
Yeah, so many of you are probably wondering what you need to do next to hopefully get to the compliance needed to meet these final rule requirements. First, I would really suggest using those automated testing tools that we talked about earlier to see where your website currently stands on accessibility. This will give you a good idea on what things you need to look at and what kind of fixes you need to make. And yeah, so and then I would also encourage you guys to have an accessibility audit conducted on your website. And so what this really is you'll have someone look at your website and they will be able to provide not only those automated testing tools as well, but they'll test it likely with a screen reader and really have a good knowledge on what WCAG requirements you should be focusing on. And here at Able, we type out this long report and we kind of walk you through those steps on what things are easier to fix, what things you really should focus on or our main concerns. I would also really suggest training your staff on accessibility best practices, getting them familiar with accessibility, not only in terms of learning about disability, but what accessibility should look like going forward.
And let's stop a second, folks, and let's go back and have just a little bit of real talk about getting your audits done. Because you have an excellent resource in Able SC. Audits are thousands of dollars by many big name auditing firms. But you have Able SC here where SCAC is allowing you to have your audits done. You have people who work with and who are people with disabilities. You've got an excellent, excellent resource that you're not going to get from necessarily one of the big name auditing firms that will way overprice you for, in my personal opinion, what is likely to be a lower quality service. So if you are concerned, take advantage of the offers that you have right now being part of this with SCAC. Okay, so we're going to address what is a little bit of the elephant in the room for digital accessibility professionals. And that is the quick fix solution to compliance, also known as the digital accessibility overlay, also known as words Sarah Massengale doesn't say in professional context, but says a lot out of professional context. These overlays are scary and they are deceptive and they will take advantage. The companies will. This is a single line of code that purports to be inserted into the back end of a website and fix all of your accessibility problems. That is not what happens. Let me 100% tell you now that they can fix some of them. They can fix color contrast. They can fix, if someone needs a different font or font size. They are excellent at that. But when you enable them for a screen reader user, for keyboard-only navigation, for the semantic structure of using your headings correctly for labeling form fields, you get some pretty nasty results. And I want to ask Corinne to talk us through the screenshots on the next couple of slides and exactly what she saw here when she ran an audit.
Yeah, so when looking at overlays, we come in contact with a lot of these overlay companies and we look into them to understand them better. And so one of them that I've recently looked into is Recite Me. Recite Me claims to help create an inclusive experience online. And so I wanted to test their tool on their own website. On the far left, you'll see a screenshot of the website without the overlay um, brought up. And you'll see that they have about 40 issues. And this is using the Axe DevTools automated testing tool. Um, and you'll see that, there's a critical issue, there's a few serious issues. Probably things that, there's only 40 so far what we can see with this automated testing tool. So fixing it without the overlay might pose to be a little easier than when you implement this overlay. At the very top of this next image of Recite Me, you'll see that there's a little toolbar at the top, and that's what a lot of these overlays will do is they'll put a little toolbar at the top. And once you activate that toolbar, you'll see that their issues jump from 40 to having a 403 issues, with a large majority of those being serious issues, and it really leads their website to being inaccessible and fall out of compliance. And you'll see this.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry, Corinne.
And you'll see this with a lot of different overlays out there that they'll claim to fix some issues, but they will break a lot of others.
And so it's important to know that this is an automated testing tool report. Automated testing tools do sometimes manufacture false negatives and false positives. But think about it like this. 10 to 20 issues is usually what we hope to see in an automated testing report. Even accounting for false negatives and false positive, 400 and something issues is ridiculous. And this is for a product that claims to help folks with disabilities. So that is purposely designed to kind of make you wonder. And come armed if you ever encounter an overlay company with this information, because they will do everything in their power, many of them, to sell you on this is the way to achieve compliance. This is what you need. This will fix everything. It will not. Many people have still gotten complaints with these overlays enabled. So just be wary and be aware. All right, so Corinne, talk to us a little bit more about the timeline. What are our compliance dates and the expectations here?
Yeah, so the final rule was published in April 2024 of 2024. And then it went into effect in June of 2024. But there is still time to kind of work towards accessibility and making websites and your digital platforms accessible. So for public entities with a population of 50,000 or more, they should work towards compliance and have this kind of solved and figured out to an extent by April 24th of 2026. Now, this changes for entities that are less than 50,000 or have entity that is special district government or should work towards compliance by April 26th of 2027. So there's still time to learn about accessibility, kind of figure out what your next steps are. But it is something that we encourage you start now actively working towards on how you're going to address accessibility within your digital platforms.
Now, I am going to add a note to this, just a thing to keep in mind. So this is for any digital content that already exists. If you are building out new digital assets now, this set of compliance dates does not account for and care about that. All of those digital assets that you are building out now must be compliant. If they were built after the June date that the final rule went into effect. All right, so let's talk about the different exemptions because there are different things that the final rule does not apply to. And so the first of these is archived web content, which is a fancy way of saying any content that is kept on a separate section of the web for research purposes that is not necessarily customer facing, but is there for, just for private use. For instance, maybe old concert programs are kept in a different place. Old, scripts might be kept somewhere in the case of arts organizations, different things like that, that the average person isn't necessarily going to be looking for, but that you need to keep around. Those things can be exempted from the fine. All right. Corinne, you want to talk a little bit about pre-existing electronic documents?
Yeah, so for pre-existing conventional electronic documents, this includes documents with word processing and presentations, PDFs, or spreadsheet files. These would be made available on the website or mobile app before April 24th of 2026. So this changes when after this date, but for anything before then, these would be exempt from this. They are not currently being used to apply for, access, or participate in services, programs, or activities. So if they're not currently being utilized with your programs or the things that you're doing with your organization, they would be exempt from this rule.
Individualized password protected content. So this will not necessarily apply to many of you, but this is a personal soapbox of mine as a blind person who does use a screen reader. But if this content is behind a password wall, so in a portal, in a banking application, in an online bill pay situation, that content is actually not required to be compliant. And if I continue on, we might be here for another 2 hours with me talking about why that is not okay. But let's leave it at that is really not acceptable in any way.
And
All
the
right.
next one would
Yeah, go ahead, Corinne.
this one would be pre-existing social media posts. These are any posts that were published before April 24th of 2026. And correct me if I'm wrong, this includes like providing alt text or image description, as well as if those posts have color contrast issues, things like that.
Okay. So let's then talk about third-party content. And this is a big one
Sarah,
because yes.
hey, this is Mary. I want to take us back just 2 slides really quick to the password protected information.
Yes.
I want to stress for folks, this doesn't mean you don't have to provide the information. So let's say you do have a password protected portal that your board has access to documents, for example, maybe your bylaws, they can log into your website. We have a staff website, we can log in and get some information. You don't have to automatically make all of that accessible. But if you have someone who says, I need information that's accessible behind this password protected, you then still have to make that accommodation. That's still a reasonable accommodation. So there's some nuance here. And that's a little bit of why when the DOJ was having this discussion and we weighed in heavily on their through public comment in some of this, there are still requirements for folks to provide the information. It's just how you get there. So hopefully that makes sense. It doesn't mean, again, that you don't have to provide it. You just don't necessarily have to make everything that's behind that password protected portal accessible.
Yes.
Until someone asks.
That's a really important piece. Thank you, Mary, because yeah, if someone asks, you absolutely do have to provide accessible alternatives. You just, as Mary said, are not required to build a fully accessible password portal out of the gate. Okay. So third-party content. Many of us use third-party platforms. We use ticketing platforms, we might use scheduling platforms, things like that. And we can't always guarantee that those things are going to be accessible. But, and while there is some room for this to be exempt and you to not be penalized for the inaccessibility of those platforms, there are some tricks that you have available to you to try and figure that out. And I want to talk about that a little bit because there are two documents that folks have the ability to request and figure out if their third-party platforms have those documents. And they are called a VPAT, Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, and an ACR, Accessibility Conformance Report. And as someone who is considering the use of a third-party platform, you absolutely have the right and should ask the representative of that platform that you are working with if they have either one of these documents. You may get a very puzzled look. You may get to start a really awesome conversation about accessibility. And then you may get lucky and get one of these documents. And if that happens, and you get those documents and you go, what in the heck am I looking at? This is another thing that Able SC can help you do. Read these documents, look at these documents, understand the accessibility of the third-party platform that you are considering purchasing. Because while they're exempt, that doesn't mean you shouldn't at least try for accessibility if you have the ability to do so. All right, Corinne, talk to us a little more about enforcement, if you would.
Yeah, so the DOJ currently doesn't have anything specific penalties on noncompliance, but there are still a few things that should be considered when trying to meet compliance. Individuals with disabilities still hold the right to sue government entities under the ADA for inaccessible websites and apps. They can still file complaints about inaccessibility online. Courts are empowered to also order any legal website modifications and payment of monetary damages and attorney fees for ADA violations related to websites and app accessibility. So although there isn't anything that the DOJ has put in place for like fines or other types of penalties, there are still things that individuals can do if they find that your website is not compliant or is inaccessible.
So let's stop here. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to let us know, to come off mute, to write those questions out, however is most accessible to you. And then if we have some additional time, we can see about taking a look at one or two of the websites with the screen reader. So if you have any questions, absolutely now is the time.
Folks, we're going through and I'm trying to make sure folks can come off mute and ask questions if you want to, but wonderfully there are a lot of attendees today. So feel free to pop it in the QA, and I see that we've got a couple in there. So I will address these really quick. Is this webinar specifically regarding Title II entities? No. This is specifically, this is anyone impacted by Title II or Title III, which is going to be public entities. So places of public accommodation. So, arts organizations. But then there's this, with regard to 508 compliance, that's for folks who receive federal funding as well. And we've got another question for nonprofit orgs, Title III, that are not receiving federal funding, but are receiving state funding. Are these organizations required to comply? Yes. And that is I think that the the most impactful part about this, because, for a long time we've had standards, for how we determine physical accessibility. In 1991, they first passed the accessibility and design standards, AAG, and I've got those letters mixed up. But that said that we know a door needs to be this wide, a ramp needs to be this level so that folks can get in. And we didn't have anything to say what sort of digital spaces needed to look like. And so now we do, and that is what this WCAG standard is with regard to the final rule. And Sarah, I'll let you weigh in if you have anything else, but I want to make sure I answered those two questions.
No, that's great. And I think that covers both of those. I want to address a couple of questions that have come into the kind of the all panelists feature. To address the question of YouTube, yes, you will have to continue to upload 2 videos. There is unfortunately nothing we can do about that until YouTube does something about that, but that is not on you. Ideally, we would like to be able to upload 1 video, but we also understand that for a sighted user viewer who has never experienced audio description can feel like a lot. And so right now, unfortunately, uploading 2 videos is the best alternative. And then for the question about grant funding, Amanda, do you and Mary want to take this and kind of talk about the work that SCAC is doing and how the grants can help with that?
Sure, this is Amanda. So we do have some grant funding available. Alicia, we have our accessibility grant, which is our rolling grant, that is available to organizations. That's a smaller scale grant, with a one-to-one match. So that's $2,500. So it's not, going to cover everything, but it is a good place to start, especially if you're seeking some initial audits or just some of the initial work. So our accessibility grant's open now, and it has rolling deadlines, so you can apply throughout the fiscal year. And then we're working on some other new accessibility grants that will be opening hopefully in the spring, that we're still kind of in the development phase for. So I can't share exactly what that looks like at the moment, but just know that we are working on some other opportunities for organizations, but would definitely encourage you to look at our current accessibility grant that's available at the moment.
Thank you, Amanda. Any other questions, folks?
And this is Mary again. I want to come back and just, remind folks, if you didn't see that before, if this was a lot of, oh my goodness, what do I do? Digital accessibility is such a new concept to me. We do have the webinar that we did last year, that is more of an introduction to digital accessibility. And again, as you start moving through some of these practices, if you aren't sure what this means, as you are updating your social media posts or flyers, if you're really not sure how to do that, please, don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know how we can be helpful. And that question that just popped up, Amanda's with the South Carolina Arts Commission.
And I just want to kind of, as folks are deciding if they have any last questions, just kind of give a last thought that, like, this is a lot. This is a lot of information. This is a lot to take in. it's probably kind of eliciting the, oh my gosh, what do I do reaction for some of you. It does not have to be terrifying. It does not have to be overwhelming. You have folks that you can reach out to. You have AbleSC, you have the Arts Commission. They can point you in the direction of other resources if they don't have the answer or find the answer for you. You are not alone as you move through this, and it does not have to be kind of the terrifying process that many people throughout the country, I think, are concerned that it will be figuring out compliance for the first time.
Sarah, we had one more question in the Q&A. Do we need descriptive alt text for images we use on a page that is mostly added for decorative purposes and does not add any context to the text? Do you want to take that one?
I do. Would the writer of that question be willing to come off mute and have a little bit of kind of Q&A with me about what those images are? And let's talk a little bit more about how they are decorative versus like adding stuff to the content. And if not, that's totally okay. Like, I do not mean to put you on the spot. I will give you just kind of a general answer. So decorative means a couple of different things to different people. Typically, when we think about decorative, we think about like the borders around a page or a small icon or design elements. Those are true decorative elements because those do not enhance a screen reader user's grasp of the page or the content that you're producing. But if we're talking about, say, an article on a play that was recently done, and we have an image of perhaps one of the actors in costume, that is actually not really a decorative image because that does enhance a screen reader user's experience of the article, just as it would enhance a sighted user's experience of the article. So if you're looking at design elements, like those borders and things I was discussing at first, those you absolutely do not need to alt text. That is not a problem. We just leave the alt attribute in the HTML empty, or we don't add alt text to the document. But if you're looking at images like the actor in costume that I described, that's not decorative. And so we do need to make sure we're using the alt attribute there or adding the alt text to the PDF or Word document or what sort of document you're using. Is that helpful? Awesome.
Sarah, I will just piggyback on that. And that is something that we talk about and we give some really great examples in that first webinar. And Amanda did put that link down below to the YouTube channel because there is a lot to that. And we've got some really great examples, some how to do alt text if that's helpful. We talk a lot about the difference between a decorative image and something that does need alt text. So there's a little bit more for that, but we are also happy to be a resource. You know, you're welcome to send us a link to a page and be like, help, what do I do here?
Absolutely.
Oh, I see. Well, Natalia, you said you were getting a mic. You're welcome to come in, and if you still want to chat about that, I mean, we've got time.
Yeah, we've got time. Please.
Yep, go for it. Unless, is it making you ask us to
We got a little funky with
no.
the number
Hi, this
10.
is Natalia. So the question I have is more, if it's more of a performing arts resource, a resource that teachers would use online, where it's more like a handout, but the image is not specifically it's just like a picture of that handout, like it's already printed, or sometimes it's just a picture of kids engaging with like that pretty much reference that document, but it's not specifically of that activity itself. It's more just kids being happy.
Got it. So there are mixed views on this. So first of all, I think I heard you say, and it at one point it was a little hard to hear your audio, but I think that I heard you say that one of the kinds of images might be an image of a handout. And so if I did hear that correctly, and if I didn't, please let me know. Be mindful of that because that falls into that images of text category that we were talking about earlier with the ransom note example. And that is actually not something we want to do. That does not need to be present on a page.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so the way we have it set up, it's more like a blog with a featured image where the handout is in text form, but we also have an image because we needed it to be a display for a layout to see, to showcase all of them. That PDF is used also as a picture, like a featured image.
So I would still be very wary of images of text. I would consider what alternative picture I could use there and just leave it in text form because you struggle less. It's not a violation per se because you do have the text written out. So you are not non-compliant in that instance. But you've kind of got what we'd call a usability issue because you've got what we would think of as redundancy. So I would be careful of that. Think about another image you could use there instead. The other thing, so thinking about the images of the children that you're talking about. So yes, they are quote unquote decorative, but and this may get a touch uncomfortable, so I apologize if it does, but we're gonna talk ableism and inclusion for a second. So this may be, in the strictest sense of the word, this is decorative. But you show this image to a sighted person. And why do we show this image to a sighted person? We do it for two reasons. We show it to evoke emotions, and we show it to draw the eye. Now, drawing the eye isn't important for a blind user. When the user is totally blind, low vision, that's a different story. But the evocation of emotion is important. And because the evocation of emotion is important, we want equity, not just equality. And so because of that, that image does need to have alt text.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Hey, Sarah, Mary again here, and I just put it in the chat, but just in case I didn't get to say this as folks left, I completely misspoke, and I am so glad that someone shot me a message. I said that 508 covers federal grant recipients. It does not. Those are just the agencies that the activities that a federal agency engages in. However, Section 504 of the Rehab Act does cover those folks who receive federal funds. So there's so much intricacy here in where you get your money, what your activities are, what you're doing. I think the take home for that is make your stuff as compliant as you possibly can. Because while this rule came out for Title II entities, perhaps it's wishful thinking, but I don't think that is going to be too far behind for Title III entities. Those are ADA. So thank you so much for bringing that error to my attention so I could highlight that for folks. I so appreciate the group of really fantastic, smart folks that we have that join us today.
And I will add to that that I like Mary kind of hope for a world where Title III is not far behind, because I'm seeing as an accessibility pro what's happening in Europe. And Europe is already miles ahead of us when it comes to digital accessibility. So if we follow their lead and we adopt standards similar to what they're doing now, Title III will not be far behind.
Okay,
Well,
well, folks, I think
no, go
that
ahead, Mary.
nope, I was just going to say I think that I don't see any more questions coming through, and I definitely see some folks hopping out. So yes, we got the survey up there. You go ahead, Sarah and Corinne, y'all close this out.
All right, absolutely. If you do have any more questions for us, there is a contact us slide at the end, slide 43, that has all of our information. My consulting email is there, as well as the contact for Able SC folks, for Corinne, and probably from Mary as well. So if you need us, do not hesitate to reach out. And absolutely, if you have any other questions that you think about after the fact, let us know. If anybody does have questions and would like us to stay on for a couple of minutes, we can also do that. Just let us know.
Thank you so much, Sarah and Corinne. This was great. And I know, like Sarah said, it feels like a lot of information, but just knowing your resources, and I appreciate you breaking those steps down of where to start and how to start to move forward in this. So we just appreciate it. Know that this is being recorded, so you can go back and revisit it, and we'll get it up on the website soon. And just we hope that you all will join us for our upcoming kind of second half of this series, which will launch in February and will go through June of next year. So thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Thank you so much, folks.